The air in the hospital room swirled around Eleanor Vance like a heavy silk shroud, steeped in the scent of antiseptic and the weary drag of anticipation. The tall window offered a view of the city's gray sky, where skyscrapers reached like skeletal fingers towards the clouds. Eleanor lay there, her body frail beneath the crisp white sheet, her deep blue eyes fixed on the distant emptiness where once vibrant hopes now lay as ashes. She was no longer the radiant, vivacious woman Arthur Finch had once been captivated by, the one who had drawn him in with her sharp intellect and warm smile. A rare illness had steadily consumed her, transforming her into a fragile, delicate shadow. Arthur, her husband, visited rarely. His appearances were brief, awkward moments, filled with a palpable distance. He would stand at the threshold, never approaching the bedside, his gaze sweeping over her with a detached indifference that pierced her far deeper than any physical pain. Each visit felt less like a husband checking on his ailing wife, and more like a reluctant business obligation, swiftly discharged before he could be truly inconvenienced. He would offer a perfunctory inquiry about her health, his voice devoid of genuine concern, and then his attention would drift, often towards his phone, an unseen world holding more allure than her suffering. Eleanor, ever perceptive, noted the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his jaw would tighten, the fleeting glances at his watch. He had always been ambitious, driven by a relentless pursuit of wealth and status. But illness had revealed a chilling undercurrent of self-preservation that overshadowed any lingering affection. The presence of Seraphina Dubois, Arthur's new executive assistant, had become an undeniable, festering wound in the already fractured landscape of their marriage. Seraphina possessed a striking beauty, a stark contrast to Eleanor's fading vitality. Her hair, the color of polished mahogany, cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes, a sharp, intelligent green, held an undeniable spark of ambition that mirrored Arthur's own. Eleanor had met her once, briefly, during a rare visit to Arthur's corporate office before her health deteriorated completely. Even then, Eleanor had felt a prickle of unease, a sensing of something predatory beneath Seraphina's impeccably professional facade. Now, Seraphina's name began to weave its way into Arthur's conversations with a frequency that was both subtle and insidious. He would mention her efficiency, her sharp mind, her ability to anticipate his needs, all delivered with a casualness that screamed of calculated emphasis. Eleanor, confined to her bed, could only imagine the dynamics unfolding outside her sterile sanctuary, the effortless magnetism between two individuals driven by similar desires. One afternoon, a nurse, her face etched with a mix of pity and professional detachment, brought Eleanor a small bouquet of wilting white roses. "Mr. Finch sent these," she mumbled, her voice gentle. "And a card." The card, a generic one, bore Arthur's hastily scrawled signature and a brief, impersonal message. It was a gesture so transparently performative, so utterly devoid of genuine sentiment, that it served only to amplify the chasm between them. Eleanor held the card, her fingers tracing the impersonal curves of his handwriting, and a quiet, profound sadness settled over her. It was not the pain of abandonment she felt most keenly, but the chilling realization of how completely she had been erased from his emotional landscape. He saw her now not as a partner, a love, but as an obstacle, a burden to be managed. Her mind, despite the constant fatigue and the fog of medication, remained remarkably lucid. It drifted back to their early years, the fierce passion, the shared dreams. Arthur had been different then, or perhaps she had simply chosen to see only the best in him, overlooking the nascent seeds of his ruthless ambition. He had always admired her intellect, her unwavering moral compass, her ability to see through pretense. He had called her his anchor, his steadying force. How ironic, then, that she, his anchor, was now adrift, cast off by the very man she had once held steady. Eleanor's family, the Vances, were an old line, their history interwoven with whispers of eccentric wealth and a peculiar, almost mystical, attachment to their ancestral lands. There were old tales, passed down through generations, of a vast fortune tied to a peculiar curse, a legend that spoke of immense prosperity for those who held it legitimately, but ruin and desolation for any who sought to claim it through deceit or treachery. Eleanor had always dismissed these stories as quaint folklore, the whimsical musings of distant relatives. Her own upbringing had been modest, her parents choosing a quiet, academic life far removed from the grand, sprawling estates and enigmatic legacies of their more prominent Vance kin. She had heard fragments, hushed conversations at family gatherings about the Vance fortune and the curse of the inheritance, but had never truly paid them much mind. It felt like something out of a Gothic novel, utterly detached from her practical, grounded reality. Yet now, as she lay there, discarded and vulnerable, a strange curiosity began to stir within her. The tales, once dismissed, took on a subtle, unsettling resonance. Her father, a man of quiet wisdom and deep respect for history, had once alluded to a hidden layer of complexity to the Vance legacy, something more than just dusty heirlooms and forgotten gold. He had spoken of safeguards, of protections woven into the very fabric of the inheritance, designed to ensure it fell into the right hands. He had never elaborated, always trailing off with a thoughtful, enigmatic smile. At the time, Eleanor had simply assumed he was being poetic. Now, a chill traced its spine. Could there be more to these old wives' tales than mere superstition? Could there be a tangible truth behind the curse that had haunted her family's lore for centuries? She closed her eyes, the exhaustion a constant companion. But her mind refused to rest. She pictured Arthur, vibrant and self-assured, thriving in a world she was slowly fading from. The thought, instead of fueling despair, ignited a spark, a faint ember of defiance deep within her. She had always been a fighter, intellectually and emotionally. This illness had tested her spirit, but it had not broken it. If Arthur believed her to be a fading bloom, a problem easily discarded, then he would be in for a profound and shocking revelation. The Vance blood that flowed through her veins, thin and weakened by disease, still carried the resilience of generations, a stubborn refusal to be extinguished. The quiet dignity with which she bore her suffering was not weakness, but a deep reservoir of strength, waiting for the opportune moment to manifest. She would not be a casualty of his ambition. She would not simply disappear. There was a legacy, a whisper of a fortune, and a curse. And for the first time, Eleanor Vance began to consider its implications not as a myth, but as a weapon. The hushed silence of the hospital room was replaced by the echoing vastness of the sprawling mansion Arthur and Eleanor once called home. The air, once filled with the faint scent of Eleanor's favorite jasmine, now carried the sharper, more modern fragrance of Serafina's expensive perfume. The formal living room, typically a sanctuary of quiet evenings and shared books, became the stage for Arthur's final, brutal declaration. He stood by the grand fireplace, its hearth cold and empty, mirroring the chill that had settled in his heart. Serafina stood a respectful distance behind him, her posture impeccable, her eyes fixed on Arthur with an almost unnerving devotion. Eleanor, her strength a fragile thread, sat on a velvet armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a silent sentinel awaiting the inevitable. "Eleanor," Arthur began, his voice surprisingly devoid of emotion, a tone he usually reserved for difficult business negotiations. This isn't working." He gestured vaguely between them, as if the chasm was a physical, tangible entity. "Your condition, it's deteriorating. And frankly, our life together has become untenable." He avoided her gaze, his eyes flitting around the opulent room, as if searching for something to anchor his resolve. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, not of surprise, but of a profound and crushing confirmation. She had seen this coming, had felt the gradual erosion of their bond, the slow, agonizing death of what they once shared. But hearing it articulated in such stark, businesslike terms was a different kind of pain. Untenable. Eleanor's voice was a whisper, but it carried a steel that surprised even herself. Is that what you call a marriage? Arthur, a spreadsheet entry that no longer balances. He finally looked at her, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Don't be dramatic. Eleanor, this is about practicalities, about the future, our future. You need constant care, specialized treatment. It's a strain. On me. On the company. And it's not fair to either of us to pretend otherwise. He paused, taking a shallow breath, as if bracing himself for an unpleasant but necessary task. Serafina and I, we have a connection, a clear path forward. She understands my vision, my ambitions, things you, frankly, can no longer provide. Serafina stepped slightly forward then, a ghost of a sympathetic smile gracing her lips, a gesture that Eleanor found more infuriating than any outright hostility. Eleanor, I truly regret the circumstances. Serafina's voice was smooth, polished, but Arthur needs a partner who can stand by his side, actively participate in his life, his work. It's what he deserves. Her words dripped with a saccharine sweetness that made Eleanor's blood run cold. This wasn't sympathy. It was a veiled declaration of victory. So, this is it then, Eleanor said, her voice stronger now, rising above the tremor in her hands. You abandon your sick wife for your secretary, a truly commendable display of character. Arthur. Her gaze bore into his, unwavering, forcing him to meet it. For a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of discomfort, a ghost of the man he once was, before his eyes hardened again. It's a divorce. Eleanor. A clean break. My lawyers will handle everything, he stated, his tone firm, signaling the end of the discussion. You'll be provided for, of course, a generous settlement to ensure your comfort and continued medical care. The cold transactional nature of his offer was a final insult, reducing their years together to a mere financial equation. He believed money could absolve him of his moral failings, that a sum could erase the pain of betrayal. Eleanor did not argue. She did not plead. The fight had long since left her for that particular battle. Instead, a peculiar calm settled over her. She realized in that chilling moment that the man sitting opposite her was a stranger, a shell of the person she had loved. And in that realization, a profound sense of liberation began to bloom amidst the desolation. Very well, Arthur, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Let your lawyers proceed, but understand this, what you discard so readily, you may find yourself regretting beyond measure. There was no threat in her voice, no anger, just a quiet, almost prophetic certainty. It was a statement born not of bitterness, but of a newly ignited understanding. The divorce proceedings were swift, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion, at least on Arthur's side. Eleanor, advised by her family's long-standing legal counsel, Mr. Alistair Reed, a man whose wisdom was as vast as his years, agreed to the terms without a single protest. Arthur, smug in his perceived victory, believed he had rid himself of a burden, a reminder of weakness, and was now free to pursue his grand ambitions with Serafina by his side. He saw Eleanor as a fading ember, easily extinguished. He was utterly unaware of the dormant fire, the ancient power stirring within her. After the divorce was finalized, Eleanor retreated further into her shell, but this time, it was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. Her health, though still precarious, seemed to stabilize, as if the immense emotional burden of her marriage had been a significant weight on her physical well-being. Mr. Reed. a man with a deep understanding of the Vance lineage, began to visit her more frequently, not just as her lawyer, but as a confidant and a guide. He brought with him old documents, faded parchments, and leather-bound journals from the Vance family archives, items that Eleanor had previously dismissed as historical curiosities. Your father. Mr. Reed began one afternoon, his spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, as he carefully unfolded a brittle map. He always believed in the truth behind the family legends, more so than anyone else in your generation. Eleanor. He pointed to a faint marking on the map, a symbol Eleanor vaguely recognized from old family crests. The Vance fortune, as the stories go, is not merely gold or land. It is something far more profound, something that has been protected for centuries by a unique system of safeguards. He spoke of the curse of the inheritance, not as a supernatural hex, but as a meticulously crafted series of legal and structural deterrents, designed to safeguard the true inheritor and punish those who sought to usurp it through deceit. It is said, Mr. Reed continued, his voice hushed, that any who lay claim to the Vance legacy without genuine right or with ill intent will find their own fortunes crumbling, their ambitions turning to ash. The fortune, they say, rejects the unworthy. He recounted tales of distant Vance cousins who had attempted to seize control of properties or assets through fraudulent means, only to suffer inexplicable financial ruin, their businesses collapsing overnight, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. Each story, though decades or even centuries old, bore an uncanny resemblance to a pattern of self-destruction. Eleanor listened, her initial skepticism slowly giving way to a creeping sense of revelation. Her father's cryptic remarks, the hushed family whispers, the old texts, they were not mere fables. They were warnings. The curse was a sophisticated, multi-layered defense mechanism, built by generations of intelligent and foresighted Vances, meant to safeguard their true wealth, which, Mr. Reed implied, was not just monetary but also consisted of ancient knowledge, invaluable patents, and strategic global connections. The family had meticulously documented and encrypted these protections within their sprawling estate and various trusts, making them almost impossible to decipher without the proper key or innate understanding. The true heir, Mr. Reed emphasized, his gaze keen, is not simply a matter of bloodline, but of character. The fortune aligns itself with integrity, resilience, and a sense of justice. It repels greed and betrayal. He placed a heavy, leather-bound journal into her hands. This belonged to your great-great-grandmother, Ilara Vance. She was the architect of many of these safeguards. Her writings may provide the answers you seek. Eleanor. As Eleanor held the journal, she felt a strange warmth emanate from its aged pages, a connection to a past she had long ignored. The intricate, almost calligraphic script filled the pages, interspersed with complex diagrams and what appeared to be coded passages. It was a puzzle, a vast, intricate tapestry of history, law, and perhaps a touch of something else. She began to understand. Arthur, in his arrogance, had believed he was simply abandoning a sick wife. He had no idea he had just walked away from the true heir to a legacy far grander and more perilous than he could ever comprehend. A legacy guarded by an unseen hand, waiting to exact its price from those who dared to claim it through deceit. The seeds of Arthur's inevitable downfall, sown in his own callous actions, were now beginning to sprout. Arthur and Seraphina reveled in their newfound freedom, their days a whirlwind of decadent pleasure and ostentatious displays of wealth. They bought a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, its panoramic windows offering a contemptuous view of the world they believed they had conquered. Seraphina, draped in designer clothes and sparkling jewels, orchestrated lavish parties, each one a testament to their rising star. Arthur, invigorated by what he perceived as his strategic liberation from Eleanor and her illness, poured his energy into aggressive business ventures, expanding his corporate empire with a ruthless efficiency that bordered on predatory. He felt unburdened, unshackled from a past he now viewed as a regrettable detour. The generous settlement he had given Eleanor was, in his mind, a paltry price for the boundless potential he now saw stretching before him. He genuinely believed he had won, that he had outmaneuvered fate and emerged stronger, richer, and ultimately, happier. Their conversations often revolved around their shared triumphs, punctuated by Serafina's effusive praise and Arthur's self-congratulatory pronouncements. It was the right decision. Arthur, Serafina would purr, tracing patterns on his arm during their intimate dinners. You're truly thriving now, free from the drag. She never mentioned Eleanor by name, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a tacit agreement that Eleanor had been nothing more than an impediment to his true potential. Arthur would nod, a smug smile spreading across his face. Indeed. Serafina. Some burdens simply need to be shed for true growth to occur. He saw himself as a visionary, a man who made tough, necessary choices for the greater good of his ambition. Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of her convalescence, Eleanor delved deeper into the labyrinthine history of the Vance fortune. The old hospital room, then her family's more modest ancestral home, became her sanctuary, a silent library where she pieced together fragments of a forgotten legacy. Mr. Reed, a steadfast and loyal ally, continued to bring her more artifacts, ancient deeds, encrypted ledgers, even dusty blueprints of properties that Eleanor had never known her family owned. He arranged for private tutors and experts in cryptography, ancient languages, and historical finance to assist her, their lessons conducted discreetly within the confines of her private study. Eleanor discovered that the curse was not a supernatural entity, but a sophisticated, multi-layered system of financial and legal deterrence, meticulously designed by her forebears over centuries. It was an intricate web of trusts, interlocking shell corporations, and strategically placed assets, all programmed to remain dormant until activated by a specific sequence of events or by the true heir. Any attempt to claim the fortune through fraudulent means, or by a person deemed unworthy, would trigger a cascade of protective measures. Funds would mysteriously vanish into untraceable accounts, properties would become embroiled in endless legal battles, and investments would inexplicably plummet. It was a self-correcting mechanism, designed to protect the legacy from corruption and greed, ensuring it always found its way back to those who upheld the Vance family's core values: integrity, resilience, and a profound respect for justice. The true wealth, Eleanor learned, was not merely in the tangible assets, but in the patents for groundbreaking technologies, the hidden shares in multinational corporations, and the vast network of influence cultivated over generations, all carefully insulated from avarice. One evening, while poring over a faded genealogical chart, Eleanor stumbled upon a cryptic note in her great-great-grandmother Elara Vance's elegant script. It spoke of a key that was not physical, but a confluence of circumstance and character. Eleanor mused over this, the pieces of the puzzle slowly aligning: her illness, Arthur's betrayal, his subsequent claim to their joint assets. These seemingly disparate events were, in fact, creating the very confluence Elara had written about. It was as if the curse was a living entity, waiting for the perfect storm of injustice to activate its true power. As Eleanor absorbed this profound revelation, Arthur began to experience subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in his own meticulously constructed world. At first, they were minor annoyances, easily dismissed as bureaucratic glitches or isolated incidents. A crucial investment deal, one he had considered a sure thing, unexpectedly fell through due to a sudden, inexplicable shift in market sentiment. A long-standing business associate, with whom he had closed countless deals, suddenly became evasive, citing vague ethical concerns. Small, seemingly insignificant losses began to accumulate, chipping away at his confidence. "It's just bad luck, Arthur," Serafina would say, dismissively, as she scrolled through her social media, showcasing their latest luxurious acquisitions. "Every empire has its minor tremors. She was too caught up in the superficiality of their new life to notice the subtle cracks forming beneath the gilded surface. She was a master of appearances, but lacked the depth to perceive the tectonic shifts occurring in Arthur's financial landscape. But the tremors grew more frequent, more pronounced. A major overseas contract, meticulously negotiated, was suddenly awarded to a lesser-known competitor, citing Arthur's company's unforeseen operational instability. A series of highly publicized ethical breaches, seemingly minor at first, began to plague his most profitable ventures, drawing unwanted attention from regulatory bodies. Arthur, a man who prided himself on his control and foresight, found himself increasingly perplexed. He launched internal investigations, blaming disgruntled employees, rogue competitors, anyone but himself. His arrogance prevented him from seeing the pattern, from connecting these seemingly random misfortunes to the profound moral transgression he had committed. He grew agitated, his once smooth demeanor now prone to sudden bursts of frustration. He began spending more time in his office, his face perpetually furrowed in concentration, barking orders at his cowering staff. Serafina, used to his unflappable confidence, found herself increasingly irritated by his mood swings. Their lavish parties became less frequent, replaced by tense, hushed conversations behind closed doors. The air in their opulent penthouse, once vibrant with laughter, now thrummed with a nervous energy, an unspoken anxiety. "This is ridiculous," Arthur fumed one evening, slamming his fist on the marble countertop. "It's like I'm fighting ghosts every time I close one hole, another one opens up." He was convinced there was a shadowy competitor, an unseen enemy systematically undermining his empire. His mind, accustomed to tangible adversaries, could not grasp the insidious nature of the curse, a force that mirrored his own deceit and turned it back upon him. Eleanor, miles away, continued her quiet work. She had discovered that a significant portion of the Vance fortune was tied to a series of highly classified patents for sustainable energy technology, developed centuries ago by a brilliant but eccentric Vance ancestor. These patents, meticulously protected and regularly updated through secret channels, were now worth trillions. Arthur, in his hasty legal maneuvering, had inadvertently laid claim to these patents, believing them to be merely part of the general assets he had inherited through the divorce. He had no idea he was sitting on a ticking time bomb, a powerful mechanism of justice designed to detonate at the precise moment of maximum hubris. She learned that the curse wasn't simply about financial ruin. It also manifested in social isolation, a gradual unraveling of relationships built on superficiality and self-interest. Those who had once flocked to the unworthy claimant for their own gain would slowly, inexplicably, withdraw, leaving them exposed and alone. Eleanor understood then that the Vance fortune wasn't just about wealth, it was about balance, about ensuring that true power resided only with those who wielded it responsibly and ethically. Arthur, with his boundless greed and callous disregard for human connection, was the antithesis of everything the Vance legacy stood for. His claim was not merely ill-gotten, it was inherently incompatible with the very essence of the fortune. The stage was set, not for a confrontation of brute force, but for a meticulously orchestrated dismantling of a man who had built his kingdom on the ruins of another's suffering. Eleanor sat across from Mr. Alistair Reed in his dimly lit office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and leather. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dust motes dancing in the beams through the tall, mullioned windows. Mr. Reed, a man whose silver hair and kind eyes belied a mind sharp as a razor, carefully adjusted his spectacles. On the mahogany desk between them lay an array of documents, faded maps, intricate financial ledgers, and a peculiar, almost whimsical diagram that looked more like an ancient astrolabe than a blueprint. Eleanor, despite her ongoing battle with her illness, felt a surge of energy. The more she uncovered, the more empowered she became. The curse was no longer a vague family legend. It was a complex, brilliant mechanism, and she, Eleanor Vance, was its key. "Eleanor," Mr. Reed began, his voice a low rumble. The curse, as our family legends refer to it, is indeed not a supernatural phenomenon. It's a testament to the ingenuity of your ancestors, particularly Alara Vance. She foresaw the dangers of unchecked greed and devised a system to protect the true legacy. He tapped a gnarled finger on the diagram. This, for instance, is not a map of buried treasure, but a schematic representation of the interlocking trusts and legal entities that hold the core of the Vance fortune. Each piece is designed to be dormant, almost invisible, until specific conditions are met. He explained that the curse was, in essence, a failsafe. If the legitimate heir, through misfortune or malice, was dispossessed, the fortune would become cursed to the usurper. Any attempt to exploit its assets through illegitimate means would trigger a systematic dismantling of the usurper's own wealth. It was a self-destruct mechanism for ill-gotten gains, ensuring that the true inheritor would eventually reclaim what was rightfully theirs, while the betrayer would face a proportionate downfall. The core of the Vance fortune was not simply liquid assets or tangible properties. It was an unparalleled portfolio of cutting-edge technological patents, many centuries ahead of their time, meticulously updated and protected by a global network of discrete legal and scientific entities. These patents, often mistakenly registered under generic corporate names or held in obscure, multi-layered trusts, represented a vast, untraceable source of power and wealth. Your father, Mr. Reed elaborated. He always understood that the true power of the Vance legacy lay not in its material value, but in its ability to restore balance, to mete out a kind of cosmic justice. The curse is simply the mechanism by which this balance is achieved. It's an intricate, self-regulating system designed to identify and reject those who seek to profit from deceit. He showed her old case files of Vance family members who had tried to circumvent the system, or outsiders who had attempted to steal fragments of the fortune. In every instance, their lives had been systematically dismantled, their businesses inexplicably failing, their reputations ruined. It was a pattern, clear and undeniable, stretching back through centuries. As Eleanor absorbed these revelations, Arthur Finch, completely oblivious to the ancient wheels now turning, continued his relentless pursuit of power and profit. However, the subtle anomalies he had dismissed in the previous weeks began to escalate, becoming more pronounced, more alarming. His flagship company, Finch Global, faced an unexpected, unprecedented wave of regulatory audits. These weren't routine checks, they were intrusive, meticulous investigations that unearthed minor discrepancies and technical violations that, while not immediately catastrophic, caused significant delays and cost millions in legal fees. His top-tier legal team, usually adept at navigating such challenges, found themselves inexplicably stymied, their strategies proving ineffective against the relentless scrutiny. Then came the financial setbacks. A major acquisition in a burgeoning tech sector, one Arthur had staked a considerable portion of his personal wealth on, collapsed after the target company suddenly faced a cascade of unexpected patent infringement lawsuits from unknown entities. The lawsuits were spurious, legally flimsy, yet they were enough to scare off investors and sink the deal, costing Arthur hundreds of millions. Another large-scale construction project in a lucrative overseas market was abruptly halted due to newly discovered environmental regulations that had mysteriously been overlooked in the initial planning stages. These were not mere unlucky breaks. They were precisely targeted strikes, undermining the very foundations of his empire. Arthur's frustration mounted. He paced his penthouse office, the panoramic view of the city now a mocking reminder of his slipping grasp. He barked orders, blamed his subordinates, and demanded answers, but no logical explanation emerged. He suspected sabotage, but could find no evidence, no tangible enemy. He spent countless hours poring over financial reports, searching for a pattern, a culprit. But the forces arrayed against him seemed formless, intangible. Serafina, meanwhile, began to show cracks in her polished facade. The constant stress of Arthur's mounting problems chipped away at her superficial charm. She grew irritable. her once effortless smile replaced by a tight, strained expression. The lavish parties ceased altogether, replaced by hushed, tense phone calls and worried glances at Arthur's increasingly agitated state. She had hitched her wagon to Arthur's rising star, and now that star seemed to be flickering. She began to subtly distance herself, offering less effusive praise and more cautious advice, a clear sign that her loyalty was directly tied to his success. One evening, Arthur received a frantic call from his lead attorney, Mr. Davies. "Arthur, we have a major problem. The patents. Those obscure energy patents you acquired through the divorce settlement. They're being challenged, not by a competitor, but by some ancient, obscure trust, claiming ownership through a centuries-old lineage. It's preposterous, but their legal arguments are surprisingly solid, and their documentation. It's impeccable. They've frozen all licensing revenues." Arthur felt a cold dread creep up his spine. These were the patents he had barely glanced at, dismissed as minor assets in Eleanor's portfolio. He had bundled them into a shell company, expecting a slow, steady trickle of passive income. Now, they were a legal quagmire, potentially draining his resources. Ancient trust. What absolute nonsense. Davies, fight it. Bury them in paperwork. "We're trying, Arthur," Davies replied, his voice strained. "But there's something unsettling about this. It's as if every loophole we try to exploit is anticipated. Every defense we mount is systematically undermined. It's uncanny." Arthur hung up, his hand trembling. The word uncanny echoed in his mind. He thought of Eleanor, lying in that hospital bed, her quiet, almost prophetic words. "What you discard so readily, you may find yourself regretting beyond measure." He scoffed, dismissing the thought. It was ridiculous. Eleanor was sick, frail. She had no power, no influence. This was simply a string of bad luck, perhaps a very clever, unseen adversary. He refused to entertain the notion that his ex-wife, the woman he had so ruthlessly discarded, could be connected to his escalating misfortunes. His hubris remained a blindfold, preventing him from seeing the intricate web of justice that was slowly, meticulously tightening around him. He had claimed a fortune, unaware it was a cursed one, and the curse was now claiming him. Eleanor, armed with the profound understanding of the Vance legacy, began to execute her strategy. She moved with the precision of a seasoned chess master, each move carefully calculated, designed not for immediate retaliation, but for the systematic dismantling of Arthur's empire. Her once frail body, though still battling the insidious disease, felt a renewed surge of purpose. The knowledge she had painstakingly acquired was not just power, it was a compass guiding her through the treacherous terrain of justice. She understood that the curse was not a violent force, but a meticulous unraveling, a mirror reflecting Arthur's own deceit back upon him. Her first gambit involved the complex web of patents that Arthur had unwittingly claimed. With Mr. Reed's invaluable assistance and the guidance of the ancient Vance ledgers, Eleanor began to activate dormant clauses within the patent trusts. These clauses, written in a language that defied modern legal interpretation without the specific Vance cipher, allowed the true heir to reclaim ownership through a series of legal triggers. She didn't seek to openly confront Arthur yet. Instead, she initiated a series of subtle, almost imperceptible legal challenges through obscure, offshore entities. These challenges, seemingly minor in their initial impact, were designed to create layers of legal complexity, tying up Arthur's resources and diverting his attention. Arthur, increasingly desperate to understand the source of his misfortunes, scoffed at these challenges. More frivolous lawsuits, he'd snarl at his legal team. Just deal with them. It's a distraction. He saw them as mere gnats, annoying but harmless, buzzing around his formidable empire. He was too consumed by the larger, more visible financial hemorrhages to notice the surgical precision of Eleanor's smaller, more insidious attacks. Meanwhile, Arthur's business woes intensified. Key investors, once staunch allies, began to withdraw their support, citing vague concerns about market volatility or unforeseen risks. These were not sudden, dramatic exits, but a slow, almost imperceptible trickle, each departure chipping away at his confidence and capital. His highly anticipated merger with a prominent East Asian conglomerate, which would have catapulted Finch Global to unprecedented heights, inexplicably stalled. Confidential information, critical to the deal, seemed to vanish from secure servers, or appeared to be subtly altered, creating confusion and mistrust between the parties. Arthur accused his own IT department of incompetence, launching aggressive internal audits, but the source remained elusive, like a ghost in the machine. Serafina, once his most fervent supporter, grew increasingly distant. The constant pressure of Arthur's spiraling problems weighed heavily on her. Her lavish spending continued, but it was now tinged with a frantic edge, as if she were trying to outrun the encroaching shadows. She began to question Arthur's judgment, her carefully constructed flattery replaced by thinly veiled criticism. "Perhaps you should reevaluate your strategies, Arthur," she ventured one evening, her voice sharp with unspoken fear. "These minor tremors are becoming earthquakes." Arthur's temper, once a tightly controlled instrument of power, began to fray. He snapped at Serafina, at his staff, at anyone who dared to question him. His meticulously curated image of an infallible corporate titan began to crack, revealing the raw, unvarnished fear beneath. He became paranoid, convinced that he was the target of a highly organized, professional conspiracy. He hired expensive private investigators, security consultants, and cybersecurity experts, throwing vast sums of money at an enemy he couldn't define. But Eleanor's influence was too subtle, too deeply embedded in the historical machinations of the Vance legacy, to be detected by conventional means. The curse was not a physical assailant. It was an intelligent system, working through the very laws and financial structures Arthur believed he controlled. Eleanor, guided by the ancient texts, began to exploit specific vulnerabilities within the Vance legacy's intricate design. She discovered that the true wealth was linked to a global network of guardian trusts, ancient legal entities established centuries ago to protect the family's more esoteric assets, such as patents for advanced environmental purification systems and groundbreaking medical technologies. Arthur, in his hasty acquisition of Eleanor's assets during the divorce, had inadvertently absorbed the administrative duties of these guardian trusts. He saw them as bureaucratic nuisances, delegating their oversight to junior associates. Eleanor's plan was to activate a series of audit triggers within these trusts. These triggers, when subtly manipulated, would initiate a comprehensive, legally mandated audit of all connected assets. The audits, designed by her ancestors to weed out corruption, were notoriously rigorous, demanding absolute transparency and impeccable provenance for every single asset. Arthur's entire business model, built on complex, often opaque financial structures and aggressive tax avoidance schemes, was ill-equipped to withstand such scrutiny. As the audits commenced, disguised as routine checks from various international regulatory bodies, Arthur found himself increasingly ensnared. Documents he thought were safely hidden or destroyed mysteriously resurfaced. Witnesses he believed were silenced suddenly came forward with damning testimonies. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring against him, systematically exposing every shady deal, every unethical decision he had ever made. The very fortune he had claimed was becoming the instrument of his undoing, turning his own financial machinations against him. "This is impossible," Arthur roared, tearing at his hair. "Everywhere I turn, there's another roadblock, another investigation who is doing this." His voice was hoarse with frustration, his face flushed with impotent rage. He suspected a rival CEO, a disgruntled former employee, anyone with a tangible grievance. But his mind, accustomed to tangible adversaries, could not fathom the spectral enemy that was slowly, patiently, orchestrating his downfall. Serafina, witnessing his unraveling, started to make her own discreet inquiries, not about Arthur's enemies, but about his dwindling assets. Her once shining green eyes now held a calculating gleam, assessing the true cost of staying tethered to a sinking ship. The opulence of their penthouse, the designer clothes, the extravagant lifestyle, they all felt hollow now, built on foundations that were rapidly crumbling beneath their feet. The cursed fortune Arthur had claimed was not just depriving him of wealth, it was stripping away his sanity, his relationships, and ultimately, his very identity as a powerful, untouchable figure. Eleanor, the quiet bloom he had deemed fading, was orchestrating a symphony of destruction, and Arthur, tragically, was conducting his own demise. The meticulously woven net of Eleanor's plan began to tighten, drawing Arthur further into its intricate knots. His world, once a fortress of unyielding power, now felt like a crumbling edifice, every crack and fissure exposed to the harsh light of reality. The once whispered curse was no longer a distant myth. It was a tangible, relentless force, methodically dismantling his life brick by brick. The regulatory audits, initially dismissed as minor inconveniences, escalated into full-blown investigations. Agencies from multiple jurisdictions, seemingly coordinated by an unseen hand, descended upon Finch Global. They unearthed years of questionable accounting practices, shell corporations used for illicit transactions, and flagrant violations of environmental and labor laws. These were not mere discrepancies. They were systemic corruptions, deeply embedded in the fabric of Arthur's empire. His top executives, once fiercely loyal, began to crack under pressure, some turning state's evidence in exchange for leniency, others resigning abruptly, fleeing the sinking ship. The very network of influence Arthur had so painstakingly built was now turning against him, its components fracturing under the strain. The uncanny legal challenges surrounding the Vance patents intensified dramatically. Eleanor, working in concert with Mr. Reed, had systematically activated clauses that now demanded Arthur provide indisputable proof of legitimate ownership. The old Vance documents, once dismissed by Arthur's legal team as archaic curiosities, now held undeniable legal weight. They detailed intricate historical transactions, encoded agreements, and an unbroken chain of rightful ownership that pointed unequivocally to Eleanor as the sole inheritor. Arthur's lawyers, desperate to find a loophole, discovered that the patents were far more valuable than initially estimated, representing trillions in potential revenue from sustainable energy and medical breakthroughs. The realization that he was losing such an immense fortune, one he had so casually discarded and then ignorantly claimed, fueled his rage and despair. "This is a coordinated attack," Arthur bellowed during a frantic board meeting, his face flushed, veins throbbing at his temples. "Someone is trying to destroy me, but who?" His board members, a collection of seasoned corporate sharks, exchanged uneasy glances. They saw not a cunning leader, but a desperate man losing his grip. Whispers of a hostile takeover began to circulate, fueled by Finch Global's plummeting stock prices and the relentless negative media coverage. The financial markets, sensing weakness, began to withdraw their support, drying up lines of credit and making it impossible for Arthur to secure new investments. His empire, built on a foundation of perceived strength and ruthlessness, was now exposed as a house of cards. Serafina, once the epitome of unwavering devotion, was the first to openly abandon the sinking ship. Her once radiant beauty now seemed brittle, her eyes hollowed by stress and fear. She had watched Arthur unravel, his charm replaced by erratic outbursts and a debilitating paranoia. The opulent lifestyle she had so eagerly embraced was evaporating before her eyes, replaced by a suffocating atmosphere of dread. One morning, Arthur awoke to find her side of the bed empty, her designer clothes and glittering jewels gone. A short, terse note on his nightstand read, "I cannot be part of this destruction. Arthur, good luck." Her departure was a final, crushing blow, ripping away the last vestige of the superficial life he had built. The public perception of Arthur Finch plummeted. News channels ran damning exposés, highlighting his unethical business practices, his callous disregard for his ailing wife, and the spiraling legal battles. The image of the invincible corporate titan was shattered, replaced by that of a greedy, desperate man facing public humiliation. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was in tatters. Social gatherings, once filled with fawning admirers, now became arenas of polite avoidance. The very people who had once courted his favor now recoiled, unwilling to be associated with his tainted name. In a desperate, last-ditch effort, Arthur decided to sell off a significant portion of his personal assets, his private jet, his lavish art collection, several luxury properties, to inject capital into Finch Global and stem the bleeding. However, the curse had another layer. The moment he attempted to liquidate these assets, he discovered they were either tied up in complex legal disputes stemming from Eleanor's ancestral claims, or their market value had inexplicably plummeted. The art collection, purchased at exorbitant prices, was now deemed to be of questionable provenance, its value slashed. The properties were suddenly mired in environmental remediation requirements or ancient zoning disputes, making them unsellable. It was as if the fortune itself was rejecting his attempts to salvage any part of his ill-gotten gains, turning his own desperation against him. Arthur, cornered and increasingly irrational, finally began to connect the dots, albeit in a twisted, paranoid way. He remembered Eleanor's quiet words, her steady gaze, her family's whispers of a cursed fortune. He dismissed it as lunacy, a sick woman's delusion, yet a chilling fear began to gnaw at him. Could she, frail and ailing, truly be behind this? Could the ancient, almost fantastical claims of her family be true? The thought, once laughable, now haunted his every waking moment. He called his remaining lawyers, demanding they investigate Eleanor, convinced she was somehow orchestrating his downfall. But they found nothing. No evidence of a direct hand, only the relentless, self-correcting mechanisms of a legal and financial system that seemed to be turning against him of its own accord. He stood alone in his now empty penthouse, the city lights mocking him through the panoramic windows. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic ringing of his unpaid bills and the increasingly aggressive calls from his creditors. He had achieved everything he thought he desired: power, wealth, and freedom from what he perceived as a burden. But in claiming the cursed fortune, he had inadvertently triggered its ancient protections, designed to ensure that the true heir, Eleanor, would ultimately reclaim what was rightfully hers, while he, the betrayer, would be stripped bare, left with nothing but the ruins of his own colossal arrogance. The unraveling was complete. The once glittering empire of Arthur Finch lay in ruins, a testament to the inexorable power of a justice he had so arrogantly dismissed. He sat amidst the wreckage of his opulent penthouse, the panoramic city lights now a mocking kaleidoscope of his own shattered dreams. His tailored suits hung loosely on his emaciated frame, his once sharp eyes now haunted and bloodshot. Serafina's abrupt departure had been the final straw, leaving him utterly alone in a fortress of his own making, stripped bare of everything he valued. The news of Finch Global's spectacular collapse dominated headlines. A cautionary tale splashed across financial papers and gossip columns alike. The regulatory bodies, having meticulously unraveled his illicit dealings, levied unprecedented fines that ensured Arthur would never again wield significant financial power. The legal battles over the Vance patents culminated in a resounding victory for Eleanor, as the courts, presented with overwhelming historical and cryptographic evidence, formally recognized her as the sole, legitimate heir. The revelation of the true value of these patents, a multi-trillion-dollar inheritance of advanced sustainable energy and medical technologies, sent shockwaves through global markets, solidifying Eleanor Vance's position as a figure of immense influence. A quiet giant awakened. Eleanor, though still in the long process of recovery, emerged from her sanctuary with a serene strength that belied her past vulnerability. She stood before a select gathering of legal experts, global innovators, and philanthropists, her demeanor calm and resolute. Gone was the image of the frail, ailing woman Arthur had abandoned. In her place was a woman of quiet power, her gaze clear and unwavering, her voice steady and resonant. She spoke not of vengeance, but of responsibility, not of personal gain, but of leveraging the Vance legacy for the greater good of humanity. She announced the establishment of the Vance Global Initiatives, a foundation dedicated to advancing the very technologies held within her family's ancient patents, promising to usher in an era of unprecedented scientific and environmental progress. Arthur, watching the news from a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, saw her. He saw Eleanor, radiant and commanding, standing on a global stage, embodying the very power he had scorned. The irony, bitter and excruciating, clawed at his insides. He had cast aside a queen, believing her to be a common pawn, only to watch her ascend to a throne built upon the very foundations he had tried to exploit. The cursed fortune had fulfilled its ancient promise. It had rejected the unworthy, dismantling his life with an almost poetic precision, and returned to its rightful owner. His once vast network of contacts evaporated. Former associates, who had once eagerly sought his favor, now actively avoided him. He became a pariah, his name synonymous with ruin and betrayal. The personal possessions he had desperately tried to liquidate remained unsellable, forever entangled in legal quagmires or deemed worthless due to their tainted provenance. His personal wealth, once in the billions, was now a mere fraction, barely enough to cover his mounting legal fees and lingering debts. The lavish lifestyle he had pursued so relentlessly had vanished, leaving him with nothing but the crushing weight of his own folly. Serafina, meanwhile, found herself embroiled in the periphery of Arthur's downfall. Her own attempts to leverage her connections with him backfired spectacularly, as her reputation became stained by association. Her superficial beauty and cunning were no longer enough to open doors. Instead, they marked her as a casualty of Arthur's spectacular implosion. She was left without the wealth she craved, and without the social standing she had so diligently cultivated, a ghost haunting the fringes of a world that had moved on without her. Eleanor, however, did not dwell on their demise. Her focus was forward-looking. She oversaw the careful and ethical deployment of the Vance technologies, initiating projects that promised to revolutionize clean energy, cure rare diseases, and restore damaged ecosystems. Her illness, though still a part of her reality, seemed to retreat further, as if the purpose she now embodied fueled a deeper healing. The quiet strength she had possessed in her darkest hours blossomed into an unshakable resilience. She had faced abandonment, sickness, and betrayal, yet she had not only survived but had emerged as a formidable force for good. She eventually settled into a life of meaningful work, surrounded by a trusted circle of allies, including Mr. Reed, who remained her steadfast advisor, and a new team of brilliant minds eager to contribute to her vision. The sprawling Vance estates, once steeped in dusty history, now hummed with renewed purpose, becoming centers for research and development, hubs of innovation. Eleanor had not just reclaimed a fortune, she had redeemed it, transforming a legacy once shrouded in mystery and warning into a beacon of hope. The story of Arthur Finch became a stark reminder of the consequences of hubris and the folly of underestimating those who appear weak. He had believed he was claiming a fortune, unaware that he was merely a pawn in an ancient, intelligent system of justice. He had discarded a woman he thought insignificant, only to find that she was the true heir to a power far beyond his comprehension, a power that, when awakened, would ensure his complete and utter undoing. Eleanor Vance, the abandoned wife, had not just survived, she had triumphed, proving that true strength lies not in the accumulation of wealth or power, but in integrity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Her quiet determination had turned the tide, ensuring that the cursed fortune delivered its true, profound lesson.